Welcome to RetinUp. I'm Scott Kraswanis.
And I'm John Kitchens.
John, you were just down at Kiawah Eye Retina. Last time we saw you, you had palm trees in the background, but the meeting hadn't started yet. What was it like?
Listen, it was the first ever Kiawah Eye Retina division. Kiawah Eye's had meetings for, I want to say 2 decades. And Eric Donenfeld and Kerry Solomon, along with the Helios folks, run the meeting. And it's an awesome anterior segment meeting. They put a lot of great thought into it, but this was the first time that they've done retina. Rishi Singh was in charge of it. He asked Layla Vazovich and myself to be co-chairs, and it was outstanding. I have to say, it was really nice, quaint. We had expected about 30 retina specialists show up. We had, I think, about 80 actually there.
Wow.
Great industry support and industry in the room listening to the talks and the panels. And it was really all case-based. So it was really nice. There weren't these kind of standard talks about, studies and whatnot. We just showed cases and talked about cases every day. We had the South Carolina residents talk. Duke fellows and residents came and presented cases. And then anybody who was attending was welcome to bring a case and show it. And it was awesome. It was really fun, fast-paced, and a meeting that I didn't miss a minute of, and I'm glad I didn't.
Was it panel-based? Like, was there, a group of 5 or 6 doctors up there commenting on the case, or are we hearing thoughts from the audience? What's the interaction
Yeah,
like?
so both. It was small enough that the audience could easily chime in, and a couple of my favorite people were there as panelists, but also made major contributions from the audience. Michael Stewart, Voss Sada was there. It was Voss's first time in South Carolina, so I was surprised by that he had never been to South Carolina before. But usually it was panels. You'd have one person kind of leading the discussion or presenting, and then you'd have 4 or 5 panelists. And yeah, I mean, it was just a very open, communicative meeting. And I'll tell you, it wouldn't surprise me next year if we need double the size of the room, because I think this is going to be a really popular meeting. And Kiawah, the last week of May, most people are out of school. It's a great place to bring your kids. Kiawah was not that crowded. It gets really crowded once you hit summer, but this is really not considered their high season. So great meeting. I really liked it, and I hope I'm invited back next year.
Sounds good. Tomorrow I'll be at CTS. It's my first time at clinical trials at the summit. We previewed it in our last episode with Arshad. When I come back, I will give you a summary. And then I think it's ASRS, right? In Montreal. That'll be the next big retina meeting.
ASRS is going to be exciting. It was basically 20 years ago at ASRS in 2025 Montreal where we heard about Avastin off-label use for the first time, the Anchor and Marina study. So a lot of historical relevance. Let me ask you about this CTS meeting you're going to be at, Scott. Not many people know about the CTS meeting or the clinical trials at the summit. What is this meeting?
I think of this thing almost like a think tank of a meeting. To hear Arshad Kanani describe it to me in our last episode, it's very deliberately not a CME meeting, which breaks down some barriers on who can participate. So there are industry people on the podium sitting on panels commenting on, whatever the topic is at hand, as well as clinicians, as well as, regulatory people. Wiley Chambers is going to be there. He's doing I think they call it a fireside chat. And so, yes, you don't get your CME, but because there is no CME, they're unrestricted in how they can behave and talk, which I think is a good thing because it's going to finally allow for some of the connections that you inevitably see at meetings anyway, but just not on the podium, to occur under a spotlight.
Scott, I think about it a lot like angiogenesis, another one of my favorite meetings. It's fast-paced, it's very data-driven, and they're very generous. Arshad's very generous. I think it's still free if you want to listen online and view the talks online.
I think that's correct. Yeah, I know that they at least archive it. John, you mentioned Avastin 20 years ago, Montreal, ASRS. We should talk a little bit, it's, kind of old news, but we should talk about the Outlook Therapeutic news. So with Outlook Therapeutics, they won an appeal through the formal dispute resolution process with the FDA. This is for their drug ONS 5010, which would be, if approved, an FDA-approved version of Bevacizumab for retinal indications. Talk to us about this. What are the implications of winning this formal dispute process, and what are the larger implications if this were to be approved by the FDA?
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword.
Hmm.
LYTENAVA, which is the brand name of the product that they're trying to get to market, has really had a struggle with the FDA kind of turning down several of their data points in their studies and giving them these CRLs or letters that basically said this doesn't measure up enough to get this approved. It is approved outside of the U.S. I think the U.K. actually has it approved. And, we do need a responsibly made bevacizumab, one where you're getting the right concentrations. It's made to ocular standards, so it's meant to be injected in the eye. And that's true. I mean, if you look, Slarkish has a great study that shows the variability of compounded Avastin. Sometimes when you order it, you're getting higher dose than you expect. Sometimes you're getting very little Avastin with some of these compounding pharmacies. A pretty
Interesting.
sentinel study about the variability. But on the downside, the regulators with the FDA, once you have an approved drug, may come back and be able to limit compounded Avastin. And depending on what Outlook decides to charge for this, it might create a tremendous obstacle for our patients and access. Certainly for patients with wet AMD or diabetic macular edema or RVO, they'll have indications that might allow them to get this. But for our patients with histo or myopic CNV or idiopathic
Hmm.
CNV or uninsured patients might have a lot, or underinsured might have a lot of issues accessing anti-VEGFs now that we don't have an affordable option.
Yeah, my concern would be that it will, in theory, expand access to care, but in practice actually restrict it if there is any kind of economic barrier to receiving care. And who knows with step therapy requirements what, various insurance carriers will require and where this will fit into the algorithm. In a way, I'm concerned that this almost looks like rent seeking. Like maybe this is addressing a problem that wasn't really a problem and it's finding a way to monetize something that was going just fine. But maybe to Dr. Keish's research, maybe there's something about the quality of the compounded Avastin that exists now, and we just won't know until we start seeing it in practice.
And I think the onus is really going to be on Outlook once they get this approved to price it responsibly. I mean, we know they have to make a profit, but once again, if you're profit seeking and you're pricing this equivalent to the current anti-VEGF therapies, $800, $900, even $1,000,
Hmm.
and compounded Avastin goes away, there's going to be a definite hardship that our patients are going to feel. And they can either wear the white hat in this or they can wear the black hat in this as far as being the good guy or the bad guy. And if they price it responsibly, I think they can come out looking really good if they provide access with samples and things such as that. It could be a really big win for us and our patients, but it could also be a very big loss. It's all going to be up to them.
Yeah, well, even if Outlook does wear the white hat, right, and prices it responsibly and doesn't create those barriers to care, there's nothing stopping somebody from eventually acquiring it and jacking up the rent, like a Martin Shkreli situation. And I do think that vulnerability, it just doesn't exist now. And irrespective of how Outlook behaves right now, it does leave open the possibility that something could happen, 3, 5 years down the line.
Yeah, and it also opens the door for lower priced other anti-VEGFs. So I've
Mm,
heard that
okay.
Cimerly's coming back into the fold for a much lower price. And we have a bevy of aflibercept biosimilars that are going to be hitting the market later
Yeah.
this year. And it's going to really open the door for one of them to go very low on their pricing and be very disruptive.
For now, we're going to take a break. When we get back, we're going to speak with John Miller about the Mass Eye and Ear Vitrectomy course for first-year fellows, which is coming up soon. Stick with us.
Today's episode is made possible by Genentech, maker of Vabysmo, faricimab SVOA. To hear peer perspectives and case studies on Vabysmo, you can check out their Purple Chair series featuring Dr. David Eichenbaum unpacking what drying looked like in a real-world DME patient treated with Vabysmo. Catch Dr. Eichenbaum and the entire Purple Chair series at vabysmo-hcp.com or click the link in today's show notes.
All right, John Kitchens, we are here with John Miller. He's one of the course directors at Mass Eye and Ear. John, welcome to RetinUp.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks for having me, John.
I'll tell you, John, first of all, you still look like you're glowing from the Michigan championship. It's a great thing. I don't think many people know that you, as a Boston guy, are actually really a at heart Michigan fan. What did it mean to win a national championship in basketball?
Yeah, it was a really special year for our med school alma mater. So I went to a small school called MIT with not a ton of national TV following. So I latched on to University of Michigan when I went there for med school, and kind of the rest is history. So yeah, you and I always have a fun banter throughout the basketball season about our respective college teams, and it was fun to finally win one in my lifetime that I could remember. So I was fortunate enough to go to the Final Four, and it was really fun to do that.
That's fantastic. So, Scott, we're talking about the Mass Eye and Ear Fellows course that
Mhm.
John and his colleagues organize. John, you guys have done this for years. You're in the 16th year. Tell us about the iteration of the Mass Eye and Ear Fellows course.
Yeah, I mean, I really love to credit the founders, my mentors and friends, John Lowenstein, Demetrius Vavas, started this course almost 2 decades ago. And shortly after it started, Dean Elliott, another key teacher at our hospital, really ran the course for over a handful of years together. And they had this vision of bringing a bread and butter core a teaching concept course to the retina field. And I think it was really one of the earliest ones. There are many fellows courses, as you all know, in our specialty. I think they all kind of hit on different things, but it's been a really well-positioned course right at the beginning of fellowship for first-year surgical fellows.
You know, John, that makes it really so unique that it's a first intro into retina for these first year fellows. You've done this now for years. Tell us what it means to those fellows to actually get in and get some hands on right away, because you have a really great wet lab the second day of the course.
Yeah, I really appreciate those comments. I mean, I think we have even moved it earlier in the summer. It's kind of waffled between mid and late July to as late as beginning of August. But the last 3 years that I've been working in more of a leadership role, we've really focused on that first weekend after the fellows start. It's kind of a key time. Everyone's a little nervous. They're not sure what it means to be a retina fellow. And so we try to really go through all of the core topics, both in a lecture and surgical case panel format. But then, as you said, a really heavy surgical wet lab on Saturday of the course, where each fellow will rotate through 3 1-hour stations where they're going through the basics of scleral buckling and vitrectomy and some membrane peeling and other techniques with almost a 1-to-1 or greater faculty to fellow ratio. So I think that really does set it apart.
Oh, wow, yeah, it's really hands-on. So this is July 10 and 11, so the second day will be that wet lab, the first day will be more lecture-based. Can you tell us about the faculty? I know it's a
Yeah.
rotating faculty, there's gonna be somebody that you're guaranteed to forget, but give us the highlights. Who's the big name
Yeah, I
here?
mean, I think it's been fun to watch the arc of the course. I mean, I think I was fortunate to attend it as a fellow myself, so I've seen it from the student level as well as the teacher level. And I mean, there's these are giants in the field giving many of the lectures at Harry Flynn on endophthalmitis every year. I mean, he recently has cut back, but Stanley Chang lecturing on PFO and giant retinal tear, or Steve Charles talking about the fluidics of vitrectomy. I mean, John and I were side texting last year at the course. I mean, we're sitting there as mid-career surgeons, and we're learning things. I think that's what's really cool about the course is it is focused on the bread and butter basics and core information. But even as a faculty, I learn something from folks every year, and we have evolved and rotated many key surgical minds in our field and top educators from across the countries. We do host about 40 to 50 faculty every year from outside of the hospital, and they come and dedicate. They each only give about one lecture or maybe participate in one panel, but they care that much about teaching and coming to the course that they do it every year.
Yeah, John, it's really an amazing course. I've been lucky to be a part of it now for the last 3 or 4 years, and I mean, it is incredibly surgically focused. How, in this day and age, when so much is pharma sponsored, are you guys able to pull off something that is so surgically focused for these fellows?
Yeah, it's a really good point, John. I mean, I think meetings are expensive, and the costs are only rising for everything. And so we've been very fortunate and feel very lucky to have some dedicated surgical sponsors. But we've also partnered with some educational companies as well as pharmaceutical companies who are willing to come in and have a booth on Friday. There's a exhibit hall during the breaks of the lectures, and so I think there is still interest because there's so many first year fellows. I mean, we have almost 60 first year fellows, and there's only 85 total in the country. So you're getting almost the entire first year class. So even for the non surgical companies, there does feel an advantage and interest, and something that I would credit my my partners and colleagues, close friends, Nemo Patel and Lizzie Rawson have really helped. We've added a procedural component on Saturday. So in addition to the wet labs, which are occurring in the ORs, we do also have stations where we learn new injection techniques. There's an ever evolving, part of injectables and sustained drug delivery and other things. So there's always some small iteration or evolution or simulator or something else that we work in. So that diversity has allowed us to still maintain a strong fundraising standpoint.
Scott, one of the coolest things about this course, having been there for several years, the wet labs actually take place in the Mass Eye ORs.
Well, it's
And
not in
I'd
some like
never,
hotel ballroom like they usually are.
no, this
Yeah.
is actually, you're in the ORs where these guys operate. And I'd never been to Mass Eye, so I'd never seen the operating rooms. It's an impressive thing. And that's really, really cool to use the Mass Eye facilities.
Yeah, I mean, we do that. That's part of the reason that the wet lab part's on Saturday. So it's a bit of a rat's race setting everything up on Friday night. We hope that the regular cases don't run too long, but we're kind of scrambling over there. And, the directors and the vendors are great at setting things up either late on Friday evening or getting in early Saturday morning. John Kitchens actually runs the IOL panel, which is designed to go about 30 minutes, but I always give him the wink, wink that, if setup's delayed, we might have to run this out a full hour. So
Yeah.
he's got plenty of extra material
Stretch. Yeah.
and we audible based on how the setup is going. But we're very lucky to have great facilities. Our nurses come in on the weekend. It's, at the goodness of our heart, we have a very good collegiality relationship with them and they support and helped us for many years for running that.
I imagine for a lot of the fellows, this is sort of like the first day at Paris Island, right? Where they're meeting all the other recruits. Because for a lot of them, like you said, there's about 60 or so fellows that show up. There's 85 or so around the country. This might be the first time that they're all in a room together. Is there
Yeah.
something about the social cohesion that is important at this meeting?
I think that's an important part of it, that we do keep it open to anyone that wants to come. We try to have, we try not to turn any fellows away. There's obviously some space limitations, but we haven't been at the point where we've had to turn an incoming fellow away, and as long as they register early enough. But it is a fun event. There's a Friday event for fellows, meet and greet. There's the breaks, and then there's a really nice fancy course dinner on Saturday night that is a good connection with both the fellows and also with the faculty. And I think you're right. They do now do in-person interviews as fellows, but no interview really has more than 20 or 30 applicants at it. So it's pretty rare that you would have that many crossover. There are other events later in fellowship, like Fellows Forum or the Duke course and others where they would invite a high number. But yeah, I think this is kind of like a break the ice, start a fellowship, boot camp, we've called it, where they really get all the basics and get to meet a lot of their colleagues and friends going forward.
And John, you mentioned registration. If somebody's upcoming fellow about to start their first year, that's who's eligible for this. How do they find out more about the course? How do they get registered
Yeah.
and get involved?
So, I mean, we recognize that this is a transition period for these fellows. They've just basically finished. They'll have their resident graduation probably next month. They'll be packing up their bags, maybe moving to a new city, different part of the country. So we do accept, pretty late registrations, but the registration page should be going live in the next week or two. Our excellent event planners, MCPI or medical conference planners, do post and host a registration website. And you could, if you Google search for our course, that should take you to the page. We will include a link to it in the notes of this interview, I believe, as well.
Absolutely. John Miller is one of the course directors at Mass Eye and Ear. He's also part of the leadership team for the 16th annual Mass Eye and Ear Vitrectomy course, July 10 to 11 of this year. John, thanks for coming on RetinUp and giving us a preview.
Thanks, Scott. Thanks, John, for having me.
Astellas is committed to identifying, developing, and delivering groundbreaking new therapies to protect or restore sight, improve quality of life, and revolutionize the treatment of many eye diseases. Bringing together exceptional minds, leading technologies, and a bold vision, Astellas is focused on the patients who need help the most, those whose lives are impacted by declining or lost vision with no or few therapies available. They're pioneering innovative approaches such as cell and gene-based therapies and other modalities. Together with their partners, experts, eye care professionals, patients, and their caregivers, Astellas is working to accelerate the development of innovative new medicines with the potential to become transformative therapies that will deliver meaningful value to patients and create a better future for people with eye diseases. This RetinUp podcast is brought to you by Alcon, a global leader in eye care with an industry-leading breadth of surgical products and solutions in eye care, including Unity VCS. Learn more about Unity VCS and hear how surgeons are experiencing extraordinary at unityvcs.com.
Thanks for sticking with us, everybody. Let's get to the Vitreoretinal view. This episode, we're going to talk about Encelto, which is the first and only FDA-approved treatment for MacTel 2. John, let's just start at the beginning. What is MacTel 2, and why is it taking so long to get a treatment?
Yeah, so macular telangiectasia, or MacTel type 2, there's 3 different types, is a condition. It was originally thought to be a vascular anomaly in patients that develop typically bilaterally. These patients would get irregular blood vessels that would lead to sometimes choroidal neovascularization, exudation, but many times pigmentary changes and degeneration of the retina. Now it's more thought to be a neurodegenerative process in the retina. The vascular changes are secondary, but it affects younger people in their 30s and 40s when we first start to diagnose this, and it's gradually progressive. And being bilateral, it can be impactful for our patients.
We spoke with Roger Goldberg about this in our last episode, right? We saw a wide field shot of an Encelto that was implanted. Now, this is a surgical procedure. Can you kind of walk me through what it's like to implant an Encelto, or maybe what it's most similar to that's already out there?
Yeah, so probably the most similar to Retisert, which is a steroid implant that we would suture into the eye through the pars plana. Very similar to that as far as the surgical approach, the suturing that's needed, the anchoring to the sclera. Kind of another similar but somewhat different is the Susvimo implant that we have from Roche as well. They're all implants put into the vitreous cavity for extended duration of therapy. But if you're thinking about it, probably the best way to think about it is a Retisert.
And now this is it's a cell-based therapy, so a victory for that approach. They've had, I think, about 200 patients have received an Encelto so far, and this has been pretty quick. This was approved in March of 2025, and it's not like they roll out, the day after it gets approved. So we're talking about a year and 200 patients. Is that a lot? I don't really know what the population's like for MacTel.
Yeah, Scott, I have to say that 200 patients within the first year of launch is an absolute home run for the folks at Neurotech and Encelto. It's a very expensive therapy, $250,000 for the implant. And so that creates a lot of barriers from a surgical center or hospital approach. Having to buy and bill that potentially is a real potential loser if you don't get paid for it or if there's a clawback. But really, Neurotech did a good job of creating another path called a specialty pharmacy path, where you don't make any money off the implant, but you do make, the same amount you would make for your surgical procedure. And what's really nice to see is that so many surgeons have adopted this with such fervor in the light of it being expensive, it being a limited number of patients that have this condition, and the fact that you're not making a real profit off of this. You're really doing it for the patient's good. And I think, unfortunately, too many times in medicine, you kind of start to prioritize profitability more than patient care in some instances. And in this case, it's really heartwarming to see that we've said, hey, listen, we'll do this because it's what's right for the patient.
$250,000 is a lot of money for a treatment. How long does it last? Like, are patients going to have to get this every couple of years?
Yeah, this is a really neat thing about Encelto is that it's potentially lifelong for these patients. And these are patients that present in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. So having something that doesn't need to be refilled, that doesn't need to be exchanged, is remarkable. They've actually taken an Encelto implant out. It's basically cells contained within a capsule inside the eye. And they've shown that there's viable cells that are producing CNTF. That's the component that they're engineered to produce 14 years after implantation. So it's really very remarkable and very durable.
That is interesting. It reminds me of some of those, like that hepatitis B treatment that was like effectively a cure for hepatitis B, right? It was like insanely priced. Like there was sticker shock, but then they realized actually this, we never need to re-administer therapy, and then all the other sort of like ancillary costs with somebody having hepatitis B. John, how many patients actually have MacTel? Like, how many do you see in a clinic?
I think we underestimated, Scott. But, I think the original estimates was, in an average retina clinic, you might see one a month. But when you really start to look at it, and more importantly, when your referring doctors start to identify it, and now with the access to OCT that so many general ophthalmologists and optometrists have, they're identifying these schisis cavities in the retina that are very characteristic for MacTel much earlier and much more frequently. Remember, these patients can have good visual acuity. Functionally, it's a little bit different. They can have really problematic reading speeds and whatnot because it's bilateral and affecting that kind of juxtafoveal area of the retina and sometimes subfoveal area of the retina. So the bottom line is that I find it more and more often. And what's really unique is I've had a couple of patients that have come in and we had seen them 10 or 15 years, before they were referred back to us with MacTel. And I went back and looked at their OCTs from 10 or 15 years prior. They look perfectly normal. This is a
Okay.
disease that kind of evolves into presenting in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And I took a couple of those OCTs, de-identified them, uploaded them to Claude AI, and I said, "Hey, this looks like a normal OCT. Do you see anything wrong with it?" And to me, it looked like a pretty normal OCT. And actually, AI came back and said, "There's some characteristics of early MacTel in this image."
Interesting.
And
Interesting.
uh, and so I just wonder if we can pair AI with some of our scan interpretation and actually realize that there's a lot more of these people that we haven't identified out there.
That's actually very exciting, especially because this treatment does not reverse the effects of MacTel. It delays photoreceptor death, right? It seems to slow it down by about 50%. So if you can find that patient who has really early MacTel, not just subclinical, but sort of subdetectable, at least to the human eye, that could make a really big difference. What do you tell a MacTel patient? They come into your clinic, you've been able to diagnose them, Claude didn't do it, and maybe they're a candidate for Encelto, but what's the best way to communicate to them their prognosis?
Yeah, so Scott, I think the biggest thing is to try and find the patients that are affected by this in a way that's meaningful to them. So the first thing that I tell them is what they have. I reassure them that this is not a blinding condition, and then I really hone in on reading. And I say, "Hey, how are you doing with reading? And have you noticed it deteriorating over
Mm,
time?" And I find that these patients really fall into two groups. There's a group that's going to say, I feel like I'm okay. I mean, I maybe don't see as well as I did 10 years ago, but I don't feel like I'm getting any worse. And in those patients, you're going to just reassure them and say, "Hey, we do have a treatment for this. And if it does look like it's progressing, then we certainly could consider doing something."
okay.
Contrast that with a very distinct separate population. And I find it's 40 or 50% of my patients where they'll come in and say, "I got to do something." And I've had 3 or 4 actually school teachers, female school teachers that have come in and said, "I'm really struggling and I don't know how much longer I can work. I'm having trouble reading the board. I'm having trouble grading my papers. And if there's anything out there, I want to do it." And those are the patients that are, I think, the most ideal candidates for this implant.
We're going to have to talk to some more providers about their experience with Encelto, especially as they, have patients that are 2, 3 years out after getting it, because I'm curious not just how it interacts in real world patients, but what the changing business dynamics around this are. Like, is it always going to go through that specialty pharmacy? Will there be some other mechanism that's maybe more financially lucrative, but not as risky as just doing a buy and bill? There's going to be a lot of changes here. If you're neurotech, are you going to run out of patients?
That's interesting. I don't think so. I mean,
Okay.
listen, there's going to be thousands, tens of thousands of patients with this out there. And I
Okay.
think it's a matter of, yeah, you might have this initial rush, but you also have a little bit of a delay when a new drug like this launches or a new treatment launches where insurance has to catch up. So I
Mhm.
would say that there's people that they have entered into their portal to try and see, is it going to get paid for? And, are they a viable candidate for the procedure from a insurance standpoint? And they're still working through those. It's really not until you've had a product like this out for a year that you really feel secure in how you're getting paid. And from
Okay.
a surgery center standpoint, if you are going to get paid or you need to go through specialty pharmacy. So I think we might be seeing an initial kind of push in with some patients that might have been backlogged and told, "Hey, we have this coming." But I think as it gets easier and easier to get these patients approved for this and people get more familiar with it, we
Mhm.
might see a steady stream. Now, will we see thousands of these done every year? I don't know. That would be a bit of a push, but I certainly think this is a really good initial foray.
All right. Well, listeners, thanks for joining us on the Vitreoretinal View. RetinUp is an editorially independent podcast supported with advertising. Laura Brown is our production and marketing lead, and Liz Hogan is the head of business development. If you're interested in advertising on RetinUp, have a question for the mailbag, or just have a topic you'd like us to cover, send an email to info@retinup.com. Follow us on LinkedIn and visit retinup.com to sign up for our newsletter so you never miss an episode. Like and subscribe to the show whether you're on YouTube or a podcast streamer. Leave us a review if you're feeling generous. And if you like the show or if you found this episode useful, pass it along to a colleague. That really helps us expand our audience. We'll be back next time with a fresh perspective on what's happening in retina.